Okay, team, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Anyone who joins later can certainly watch the recording. First off, so great to see so many beautiful faces from all around the world, so many familiar faces, some faces I haven't seen for a while, some brand new faces. So thank you all so much for joining. We now have 80 participants. That's incredible. We had 300 people register, so hopefully we'll gain some more attendees as Jeff begins his presentation. Well, I want to quickly just introduce Dr. Jeff Buxton. Jeff is leading the research in quadrupedal movement training using animal flow specifically. So we're so happy to have him on, and so he can share his most recent study with us. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about how this is going to go down. Jeff is going to present for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to open up the Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, just hold on to them until we have our designated question time. And Karen's just going to let us know how that's going to go down. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Sure. So for the Q&A, you can either use the little, I want to talk about my question and hit your, raise your hand, and then we'll go through there. Or we have the little Q&A module up on here. So somewhere on your screen, you should see a question mark that stands for Q&A. If you click on that, you can type in a question. That way you can see questions other people have too. You'll see everyone's questions. If someone else has typed in a question that you love, you can upvote it. You can do that. Actually, you can be typing in questions throughout Jeff's presentation. If something comes to your mind. Then when he's ready to take the Q&A, we'll look at what are the most popular questions and we'll sort them that way. And we'll alternate it with some verbal questions as well.
Fantastic. Last thing, know that we will have Jeff's slide presentation that we will email out to everyone after this meeting. So you will have access to his slides. All right. That's it. Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Okay, guys. Mike, thank you. Hang in there. Let me share my screen with you guys. Okay, it looks like something's happening. And I think we are good to go. Okay. Well, all right. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am so excited and grateful to be on this call with you all this morning. To you all who are live with us now, thank you. And what fun that was watching you guys all call in, do your global roll call. To those that are going to tune in later, again, thank you as well. And I want to thank you all for your time, your dedication, and your desire to dive deeper into this stuff. So I only reinforce what we already know, but sorry, I'm getting some error messages. Karen, are we still okay?
I think we're still okay, Jeff.
Okay. Sorry. My computer's showing all these warning signs to me here, but hopefully we're all right. Anyways, I'm sorry. As we were saying, I hope that this presentation will not only reinforce what we already know about animal flow, but also provide some new insights and encourage inspiring discussions about the practice of animal flow and quadrupedal movement training. So here we go. Welcome to the science of animal flow. Here's the intended path for this presentation. Many of you may know me from previous calls, but for those that don't, I'll do a quick intro and then we'll briefly review previous research before getting into the details of our lab's latest project. You already have directions regarding questions. Hopefully that all sounds okay with you. Okay, so this is me and my family. Admittedly, I am horrible with photos, and this one is already several years old. This was taken from the first and probably last time we'll be at the magical kingdom of Disney. But this is my beautiful wife who's next to me. That's Mandy. And then I have 3 kids. My oldest, Caden, he's right there in the middle. My middle child, Elia, she's down at our lower left. And then our feral child, Amaya, is up on my shoulders. I'm a professor of exercise science at Grove City College in Western Pennsylvania in the United States of America, where I teach mostly applied courses in both our undergraduate and master's degree programs. And I carry out research. Animal flow and quadrupedal movement training has been the primary focus of my work, but I've been blessed to be on and involved in several other really interesting projects over the years, such as low carbohydrate and high fat diets, ketogenic diets and supplements, and collectively their influence on performance and health. I've done a handful of breath work and resistance training and performance studies. Recently, I'm getting into palm cooling and resistance training / performance. Yeah, so, and there's a whole host of other little niche areas that I've been into. Prior to academia, I was a personal trainer for 10 plus years. I love fishing. I love hunting. I love my sauna. I hate relationship with the cold plunge and cold showers. And above all, I love learning and I love teaching. And again, I'm so grateful for Mike and Karen to give me this opportunity. And again, for you guys for listening. Okay, let's get into some of the early research with animal flow. This is a good moment for you all to maybe check yourself and see what is it that you recall. What were some of the key maybe takeaways from earlier research that you've seen regarding animal flow or quadrupedal movement training? And while you're doing this quick little mental quiz, I'll start by saying that Matthews et al., who we see here on the screen, they were not the first to research quadrupedal movement. In fact, several labs, including that of Volker Dietz, who I believe
Uh-oh. I think you fell out of the meeting. Hold on.
That was such a great start.
I know. I don't know where he went.
All right,
hold
everyone.
on.
Please stand by.
Do you want to call him real quick so he knows he flipped off?
I will. I will check in with him.
Okay. That might be the warning he was getting.
Feel free to talk to each other in the chat if you would like, or through audio.
I just temporarily unmuted, gave you all the ability to unmute while we fix this.
Oh yeah. Time
And
to
then
give
we'll
you
mute you
dirt.
all again when we start.
Time to give the dirt.
Let's hear it.
Actually, guys, I had Jeff in my level 1 when he first got certified. If anybody wants a
Roast time.
Can anyone else hear Chris?
No.
No.
All right, how about now? You got me?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, perfect.
As soon as you started to get into it, you went
Yeah.
silent.
I gave you all the dirty stuff, the detail. Zoom just blocked me out immediately. No, but I had him in my workshop, and as some of the master instructors know and people know, there's people who get super enthusiastic when they take the level 1 workshop specifically. And he came up afterwards and was like, hey, do you guys do like research studies and all this stuff on animal flow? And I was like, we kind of been looking for people to research specifically animal flow, because if you guys remember from the earlier years, it was a lot of FMS stuff we had research from and other studies, but it wasn't specifically done with animal flow movements. And once Jeff had that idea, we set up the call with him and Mike, and we had these conversations. And that must have been, Mike, do you remember the year? That had to be 4 years ago, I want to say, maybe longer.
I'm not sure, but Jeff seems to be back, so he could probably tell us.
There you go.
I think, hey,
Perfect
Chris, good to
segue.
see
What's
you,
up,
man.
Jeff? You too, my man.
Yeah.
Take it away, sir. I was giving them all the details and dirt on you, but now you're
Thank
back.
you.
I'll say all nice things.
Yeah. Hey, I'm sorry. I got booted. And you guys will have to help me out here where I got booted at. But yeah, to answer that question, Mike, I think it might've been as early as 2018.
Fantastic. So we'll let Chris finish that story later.
Yeah.
And we'll let you get back to your presentation. But you were saying that Matthews was not the first study to be done. And, yeah,
All
and
right,
then
all right,
that's when we
awesome.
lost you.
Yeah, so sorry guys, let me go back and let me get my screen sharing with you guys and we'll pull that back up. I'm hoping that's it for today as far as getting blown out of here. Okay. All right. Yeah, so where was I? Yeah, so Matthews et al. Was not the first. Just quickly there, several labs were looking at quadrupedal movement, including a lab from a guy named Volker Dietz, who Rich Scribner referenced in an article several years ago. But they've been looking more at the neurological processes of quadrupedal locomotion. Matthews et al. Was probably the first to look at the effects of quadrupedal movement training. This was a real simple study, guys. They looked at the impact of 4 weeks of QMT on cognitive control and joint proprioception. It was a simple pre-test, post-test design. They had a training group who performed 60 minutes of QMT 3 days per week, and then a control group. The training group performed variations of the ape and beast crawl, while both groups attempted to maintain kind of their normal training. All participants completed what's called a Wisconsin scorecard test to assess cognitive control. And they also performed a really neat joint repositioning test that they did before and after the 4 weeks. So here's what they found. They broke the Wisconsin scorecard test into 2 main categories, one being accuracy. And as you can see from the figure, the training group improved accuracy significantly after 4 weeks, while the control condition saw no improvements. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. I'll just orient you guys to this quickly here. So the clear bar represents what we call the pre-test time, and then the solid gray bar represents post-test, so after 4 weeks. And then TG is training group and CG is control group. All right, so accuracy improved. They also looked at errors, and errors was actually broken down into 2 subcategories, preservative errors and non-preservative errors. We don't need to get into the muck of the difference between those 2 types, other than to say they represent different mechanisms for the errors. But again, you can see that the training group saw a significant reduction in errors after the 4 weeks of training, while there was no change in the control condition. And then finally, the results for the joint proprioception test are similar. Again, we see less errors in joint repositioning after 4 weeks of training, while the control condition was basically identical pre to post test. So what does this tell us? Basically, guys, my takeaway is that novel movement training, like animal flow, like quadrupedal movement training, can improve cognitive control and joint proprioception. So that's a real simple reduction of their data. Leads me to some questions that might be neat to answer in the future. Could quadrupedal movement training aid in reducing age-related mental decline? Could quadrupedal movement training be useful clinically to maybe restore human motion? And maybe a third question is, would we see similar results to this if the movements were no longer novel? I think about all of the master instructors on this call and all of you guys who are probably well-versed with animal flow, and maybe even the level 1 movements where maybe they're no longer novel, but would we see something similar? So some interesting questions from this that can still be answered moving forward. Okay, up next was a study in 2017 by Darren Pica and her colleagues, and they investigated core muscle activation patterns during quadrupedal movement training, specifically during the beast, which they called the static condition. You can see that in figure 1. The beast activation, figure 2, they called it the stationary condition. And then forward traveling beast, they called it the traveling exercise. That's in figure 3 there. So they compared the surface EMG muscle activation levels of 4 trunk muscles: the rectus femoris, the rectus abdominis, the external oblique, and the erector spinae muscles. And they looked at that all along the right side of the body across those 3 movement conditions. The authors here used pretty similar techniques as we did, and you'll see in our latest study. The key thing that they did was they performed what's called a maximal voluntary isometric contraction test for each of those 4 muscles that we just mentioned. And this was used to normalize the EMG signals, meaning that the muscle activation levels that we saw during those 3 exercises could be represented as a percentage of that muscle's maximum activation ability. So let's look at what they found. Here you can see a breakdown of the muscle activation levels, again, presented as a percentage of their maximum activation ability for each of the 3 movements. Beast is represented in the solid black bars. The beast activation is the clear bars, and the gray bars represents the forward traveling beast. The upper left figure here represents the rectus abdominis muscle activation. The figure next to that represents the erector spinae. And then moving south, the figure looks here at the rectus femoris muscle, and then next to it is the external obliques. Okay, let's do a little bit of classification here. So, I'm sorry. Get my clicker working. There we go. As we look at each of these figures, we can categorize the muscle activation levels according to what current research in the literature suggests. Overall, if we look at the rectus abdominis activation, all right, we see somewhere between 21 and 40%, especially if we're looking more at the traveling and the activation exercise. And we're going to call that medium or moderate muscle activation. Moving to the right of that, we see activation levels between 0 and 20%, and we're going to call that low activation. In this case, there was a low muscle activation for the erector spinae group. Just below that, we see activations from 30 to just above 50%. And again, we'll kind of collectively lump that into this 41 to 60% zone, which literature defines as high muscle activation. And then the real neat one for this study is right here, the external obliques. Check this out. So we can see anywhere from 100 to up to 170% of muscle activation level for the external obliques. The literature classifies that as very high. Anything above 61% is very high muscle activation. Okay, key takeaways, right? Pretty obvious here. Beast position is a viable option for training muscles of the anterior core. Additionally, this research showed that adding limb movements, which meant simultaneously decreasing your base of support, generally increases the core muscle activation. And you could see that as you make the comparisons between the 4-point static beast and then the beast activations and the traveling conditions, right? The activation level tends to rise consistently. Additionally, the authors here found that women tended to experience higher muscle activation levels for the rectus abdominis and the external oblique than men did across all of the exercises. Okay, so up next is our first study from our lab looking at the impact of quadrupedal movement training on active joint range of motion, functional movement screen scores, dynamic balance, grip strength, and upper body muscle endurance. Here we had 2 groups, similar to Matthews et al., a training group which completed 60 minutes of QMT 2 times per week for 8 weeks, and then a control condition. Again, both groups attempted to maintain their normal level of physical activity throughout the study. We assessed active joint range of motion using a standard goniometer. Movement quality was assessed using the functional movement screen, as Chris Flores was just talking about. And then dynamic balance for the upper and lower extremities was assessed using a Y balance test. Your grip strength was assessed using a standard kind of hand grip dynamometer, and upper body muscle endurance was assessed using a push-up test. What we found that after 8 weeks was that the quadrupedal movement training group saw significant improvements in active joint range of motion for their hips, for their shoulders, for their ankles. The details of that are in our paper. I won't bore you guys with that now. They also saw increased FMS scores. We have the data presented for that here on the screen with the different panels. Panel A shows the overall FMS scores. This suggests that there was some improvements in not only mobility, as we just saw with the active range of motion scores, but also stability, or what we call motor control. Additionally, there were some improvements in some of the Y balance test reaching directions, which was also indicative of improved motor control. So our conclusion for this study was pretty simple. Quadrupedal movement training is a viable alternative form of exercise that can improve active range of motion and motor control. Okay, and then finally, kind of concluding our QMT research review was our study from 2022, where we sought to investigate the energy demands of quadrupedal movement training and then compared this to 2 treadmill walking conditions. So for this study, we randomly assigned the order in which participants completed 3 experimental sessions: a 60-minute animal flow class, which you can kind of see in the back there on the TV. We were using one of the beginner classes from the Animal Flow On Demand app. Some of you guys have probably done that class. And then they also performed a 60 minutes of a heart rate matched treadmill condition. I'll try to explain that. What we did here was we averaged the heart rates that were experienced during the animal flow condition, the different segments of that class. And then we tried to match that to the treadmill by increasing speed and grade of walking. And then the third condition was just a self-paced treadmill walking. So for each of these conditions, participants were fitted with a polar heart rate chest strap monitor and our portable metabolic cart. You can kind of see or get a glimpse of that. It's that funny looking blue mask. And on the back of that participant, you see there in the figure, is a small little backpack with a really expensive, really cool computer on the back of it. And that device was used to measure breath by breath the amount of oxygen that the participants were consuming, as well as the amount of CO2 or carbon dioxide that the participants were expelling. And that data was used to estimate caloric expenditure. This is a process known as indirect calorimetry. So the results of the indirect calorimetry can be seen in the figure on the left, the energy cost, while the average heart rate data is on the right. And for right now, guys, what I'd like you to focus on and draw your attention to with both of these figures, again, hopefully you can see my cursor, but focus on the far right of each figure where it says session data. What you're looking at in the solid black bar is the total average session data, males and females. And then you could see in the stripe bars, that's our males data only. And then in the solid gray bar, that's female data. So we'll talk about that first. So as you can see, regularly active males and females who were naive to quadrupedal movement training, that quadrupedal movement training, the animal flow class, resulted in an average of 7 kcals per minute, which if you do a little bit of math, you can extrapolate that out to about 400 to 420 kilocalories per session, which is pretty significant. That was equivalent to 5.4 metabolic units. And then if we shift our attention to the right figure, we see an average heart rate of roughly 127 beats per minute, which represented about 63% of our participants' age predicted maximum heart rate. Now, all of this, right, fits within the ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine's guidelines to be considered moderate intensity physical activity. Now, this is a big deal. Many of you guys know that moderate intensity, that's kind of that sweet spot of aerobic fitness that confers numerous health and fitness benefits. Okay, so big deal that we're fitting within that. So that was one of our main conclusions, is that QMT should be considered a viable activity that meets these moderate intensity physical activity demands. Our results also help to highlight, though, the differences in energy costs across the various domains or segments of animal flow, which can often be used to structure or organize a quadrupedal movement training class. If you draw your attention back to the figures, I'll break down. WM stands for wrist mobilities. ACT is your activation segment. FS is form-specific stretches. ST little s's, that's your switches and transition segment. And then flow stands for our flow segment. This class did not have any traveling form segment in it. What we see was that the wrist mobs and the activations, those segments both resulted in energy expenditures that could be classified as low intensity physical activity according to the ACSM. The form specific stretch segment actually resulted in moderate intensity. In fact, if you compare that data to the far right session data, they're almost identical for both heart rate and energy cost. While the switches and transition segment and the flow segment, many of you guys will probably agree that that actually meets the criteria to be considered vigorous intensity physical exercise according to ACSM. So we get some neat breakdown of the energy costs of each of those segments, which can be useful maybe in terms of helping us to target maybe a specific adaptation with our design of animal flow workouts or classes. Okay, so that kind of wraps up the review of past research. Let's just put it all together here. So from all of that, we can say animal flow can improve cognition and proprioception. Animal flow improves active range of motion and mobility, which can also help to improve movement quality. Animal flow practice varies in intensity depending on what domains or segments we're focusing on, but a basic beginner level class focusing on most, if not all of those domains, will elicit an average energy expenditure or efforts of moderate intensity, which again is that sweet spot that confers numerous health and fitness benefits. And then finally, we can say beast position is really good for training your core. So that brings us to our next study in the last project that we did. So here for this project, we sought to expand on the work done by Pike et al. And explore muscle activations of the upper and the lower extremities while performing a variety of animal flow movements, not just that beast position. And then we also wanted to make comparisons to some other common traditional bodyweight exercises. So for this study, we recruited healthy, regularly physically active males and females with dynamic bodyweight training experience, which meant they had experience with animal flow or some other quadrupedal movement training, or they had some experience with some other bodyweight practice such as dance or yoga or Pilates or gymnastics, something like that. We were honored to have several certified animal flow practitioners and master instructors actually make the journey out to our lab here in Grove City, Pennsylvania. It was an awesome 2 days. I know if you guys draw your attention to the picture in the upper left, I know his back is to us, but hopefully you all know who that is. Just behind him in that picture is Larry. We also see below Alex Diaz. Many of you guys probably know her. A couple other mentionables, David Wellick and Victor Reyes, who Victor was great for some comedic relief throughout the testing sessions. It was awesome. So it was great to have, be blessed to have some of the actual team come out for this project and participate in it. What we did was we familiarized all participants with the protocols and equipment that they'll be using, including the sensors, which you guys can see an idea of the sensors and the sensor placement from Alex and yours truly there. We placed the sensors over 8 muscle groups, which included the bicep, the medial head of the deltoid muscle, the medial head of the tricep, the pectoralis, the rectus abdominis, the latissimus dorsi, the rectus femoris, which is one of our big kind of main middle quad muscles, and then the bicep femoris, which is one of our primary hamstring muscles. So all participants were familiarized with the maximal voluntary isometric contraction tests for each of those muscle groups. And they were also familiarized with each of the movements that they would be performing. And for this project, participants performed 8 level 1 animal flow movements, which included the side kick through, the full scorpion, front step through, crab reach, forward crab, forward beast, lateral ape, and under switch, as well as 3 common bodyweight exercises, which included a push-up, a hands-on hip bodyweight squat, and then a basic forearm plank. So following the familiarization, participants reported back to us, to our lab, where they were prepped and they were fitted with the EMG sensors. They performed the maximal isometric tests, again, so we can normalize the data and present it as a percentage. And then they randomly performed 4 slow controlled repetitions of each of the movements that we just described. And throughout it, we assessed the peak, the highest, right? The peak activation that was achieved during each of those movements. We have data on the average activation as well, but we reported on the peak. This is a sample video of what we were looking at as the research team. This is me doing my best to hit a side kick through. But what you can draw your attention to, which I think is the more interesting thing, is the left side of the video here. You have each of the 8 muscle groups represented kind of on the upper left of each of the wavy lines. And what you can also draw your attention to is kind of the middle of the screen where you see some of these ranges for each figure or each graph. You can see a 0 to 50 or 0 to 15. Yes, sorry, the pec major, as you guys will see, didn't do a whole lot of work during animal flow, but this gives you some idea of what's happening during the animal flow movements and also when that might be happening. Okay, so let me show you another one. Here's Mike hitting a full scorpion during our testing session. And again, you can draw your attention to the data to the left as it moves through, and we can get a sense of what's going on with the bicep, the medial deltoid. Admittedly, just before Mike's session started, we had some sensor dropout. And so we had to add some new sensors, and we didn't get a chance to name them initially, but they're, the order is the same as you saw on the last slide. So this third column is his deltoid, is his tricep. The 4th row, is his pec. And then the 5th is his lat in blue. And then we get his rectus abdominis, his rectus femoris, his quad muscle, and then his bicep femoris. And again, you can also draw your attention again to the middle and to see kind of what ranges were we working with there. Okay, pretty cool stuff. I wish I could show you more of these, but that would just take too much time and we would lose ourselves, I would imagine, in a discussion of all of that, what's going on. Okay, so here's our primary results. There's a lot to unpack here, so hang tight. We're gonna park on this slide for a little bit and mark it up. What we're looking at here are the normalized muscle activation levels for each muscle group. Specifically, the solid bars represent the pooled or average peak normalized muscle activation for all 8 quadrupedal movements or for all 8 animal flow movements. So I'll say that again. This bar, the black bars, represent the average activation for that specific muscle group across all 8 animal flow movements. Okay. And then the striped bars represent the comparison traditional body weight exercises. For the upper body muscles, the bicep, the deltoid, the tricep, the pec, and the lat, the push-up was our comparison. So these striped bars are push-up data. For the muscles of the leg, the rectus femoris and the bicep femoris, we compared against the squat. So the striped bar data represents the squat data. And then for the rectus abdominis, the striped bar represents the forearm plank data. So again, hopefully that orients you guys well to what you're seeing here. I want you to recall the categories that we identified in the Pica et al. Study. Overall, when you look and just focus on the solid bars that represent the animal flow data, we can see high to very high muscle activation for each of the muscle groups, except for the pec. Again, the pec, though, was right in the middle of the moderate activation level. I want you to draw your attention also to the asterisks that are above some of the data sets. I know I hid some of them with that figure that came in, but these asterisks represent, or they signify, a statistically significant difference in the magnitude. And we see that for the bicep, for the deltoid, for the latissimus dorsi, and for the hamstring, that the animal flow movement showed a higher activation level than the traditional body weight comparison exercise. Now, this was not all that surprising for the bicep and the lat data, as hopefully most of you guys are thinking the push-up is not the best comparison for that. However, the magnitude that was observed for each of those muscle groups during the animal flow movements, 48% roughly for the bicep and about 63% for the lat, that was really interesting and actually higher than we anticipated. for a better comparison, we actually referenced work that was done by a team in 2017. They compared the muscle activation levels of the lat and the bicep during different versions of pull-ups. Lat activation during those variations were high. They ranged from 52 to about 58%. Again, that was kind of surprising to me that lat activation during a pull-up was only getting up to about 58% of the maximal activation capacity. But this is lower than what we observed in animal flow, which is interesting. So by indirect comparison, animal flow is at least comparable to, or maybe superior to pull-ups for latissimus dorsi muscle activation. So please make sure you're hearing all of the words that I'm using as I state that. This 2017 study also, like I said, looked at the biceps. And during pull-ups and all the variations, they found that the bicep activation was actually very, very high, ranging from 81 to 93% of max capacity. Moral of the story there, if you want big guns, don't neglect your pull-ups. Clearly, the animal flow data was lower than that. However, when you look at individual animal flow movements, which we'll do momentarily, some of them actually came pretty close. The full scorpion, which we saw Mike performing, averaged about a 62% muscle activation for the biceps. So there's a lot going on with your biceps during a full scorpion. Who knew, right? When we look at the activation levels for the abdominal muscles and the rectus femoris, we see there was no difference between the forearm plank, and there was no difference between the squat. This showcases that the animal flow movements were comparable to the muscle activation levels of the common bodyweight exercises, right? As expected, the push-up resulted in greater activation for the tricep and for the pec. And again, you can still see some of the asterisks above that, meaning that they were significantly greater. And again, that was a no-duh for us. This makes sense, right? During the animal flow movements, especially these level 1 movements that we did, if you think about the shoulder girdle, it mostly experienced flexion and extension rather than horizontal abduction and adduction, as well as the elbow experienced very little elbow flexion in a loaded position. Often, and if we were doing it right, we should have been in a locked elbow position for all of those movements. Interesting though, quadrupedal movement training, as we looked out for some other comparisons, quadrupedal movement training, the animal flow movements, resulted in similar, wait till you guys hear this, resulted in similar pec major activation as Moyer and colleagues found for a barbell bench press, right? They identified that with a barbell bench press, we're only getting about 25 to 30% of pec major activation, which is right around where our data falls for our animal flow movements. So we're doing just as good as a basic barbell bench press is for pec major activation. But it also goes to show there's a lot more going on with the barbell bench press than we may think, right? So barbell bench press may not be, International Bench Press Monday may not just be about the pecs. It's probably about other things as well. The animal flow movements also produced similar activation levels for the medial deltoid as another team, Sweeney and colleagues, observed for a dumbbell shoulder press. Right? They identified that dumbbell shoulder press activates the medial deltoid at about 62%. And they also looked at the classic kind of bent arm lateral raise, which was around 77%. So collectively, the data from the medial deltoid for us was similar to a classic shoulder press and a classic lateral raise. Whew. Okay, I think we've marked this figure up and we've parked here long enough. In sum, with the exception of the pec and the tricep, animal flow movements were comparable or in some cases superior to more common body weight exercises, and in some cases, some free weight exercises, again, in terms of muscle activation. Very, very, very cool data. Okay, this should be fun. I hope it'll be fun for you guys. Over the next couple of slides here, what I want to do is show a breakdown of the average muscle activation that was achieved during each of the individual animal flow movements. So we'll check these out together. Let me quickly orient you to what you're seeing. for each of these. So the abbreviation for each movement is going to be up here in the center. Here we see FS, that's full scorpion. Next to it, SKT, you guys are ahead of me, side kick through. Each of these slides will have a scale, 0 to 100. This is our normalized muscle activation, so the percent of its max ability. And then on the horizontal axis is each muscle group. So I'll just briefly kind of work through each of these with my little comments, but definitely take some time to work through these at your own pace as well there, and make some notes of interest to you. So the first up is, so I'll also say this. It'd be helpful to try to remember some of the muscle activation categories that we identified earlier. Again, as a reminder, 0 to 20% is low, 21 to 40% is medium or moderate, 41 to 60% is high, and then anything greater than 61% is very high. All right, so with that in mind, let's look at the full scorpion. Again, pretty cool. Here we see high to very high activation for all muscles, again, with the exception of the pec. And for me, at least, of interest was the very high level of the latissimus dorsi activation and the bicep activation with your full scorpion. All right. The high deltoid activation, that made sense to me, especially as we go into the inverted position. For sure, that makes sense. But there were some surprises there for me. We see a similar story with the side kick through. Again, there was very high activation of the lat, which was, again, the surprise and the most noteworthy thing, at least for me, when I was looking at side kick through data. We can also see a bit of a rise in comparison to full scorpion. We see a bit of a rise with the rectus femoris or quad data. So I'll pause just for a moment if any of you guys wanted to make some notes or some questions about that. Sorry, I got reminders coming up. I'll move on to the next set. So here we're looking at crab reach and front step through. For the crab reach, this one was the only form-specific stretch that we performed. And here you can see that most muscle groups are kind of on the upper edge of the moderate activation. They're kind of hovering right around 40 or close to that. So they're in that moderate or medium activation range, with the exception of the deltoid and the lat, which was in the very high activation range. Next to that is the front step through, which I believe is the grand champion for this experiment as far as muscle activation goes. You can see mostly very high muscle activation, again, with the exception of the pec, while both the bicep and the hamstring, they're right at the upper edge of high. They're creeping into that very high range there. So lots of muscular effort is happening during a front step through. That's basically how we interpret that. High levels of muscle effort across the entire body with the front step through. Again, that's in my opinion, the grand champion. All right, up next is the forward beast and the forward crab. These are two of the three traveling forms that we did. As expected, we saw high to very high activation for the delt, the tricep, the rectus abdominis, and the quad with the traveling beast. And then with crab, we saw mostly moderate activation levels, with the exception of the tricep, which snuck into that high activation category, and very high activation for the lats. I believe we'll see this in a slide or two. I believe the forward crab actually resulted in the highest activation of your lats. So pretty interesting. Forward crab and crab reach. We're training our lats, man. Posterior chain is happening. Okay, and then lastly, guys, is the lateral ape and the underswitch, which both were challengers to the front step through, in my opinion, for the king of muscle activation from these level 1 movements. You can see very high activation for the delts and the quads with the lateral ape, and some pretty high bicep activation as well. It creeps in that very high range. And then high to very high activation of all muscles, with the exception of the pec for the underswitch. And personally, I think that last panel there, that last graphic, that's really cool. And it highlights the utility, at least for me, it highlights the utility of this simple underswitch. I'm sure some of you guys have been you had time scheduled for maybe a free flow session, or maybe your clients did, but you were having that mental fog and I just don't know where to begin, right? And what do? You get on all fours and you start under switching, right? And you just hope that takes you somewhere. Well, even if it doesn't take you somewhere, guess what? You're touching most of the muscles of your entire body at a high to very high level just by repping out some under switches. So again, I think that panel it's really powerful and really interesting. Okay. I realize it's hard to keep track of all those bars. So here's the data that each animal flow movement produced. And what I did was I highlighted the animal flow movement that produced the highest peak activation for each muscle group. It's worth noting, though, that I also included in the bottom 3 rows is the activations that came from the 3 traditional bodyweight exercises. So kind of keep an eye on those. But we'll just quickly go through these here. So for the biceps, right, full scorpion wins, right, coming in about 62% of muscle activation, and it was superior to any of the traditional exercises. For the medial deltoid, the lateral ape wins at around 84%. Again, that was superior to the common bodyweight exercises. For our tricep, front step through at 70%. This actually tied the push-up. Again, this is interesting. The front step through resulted in just as much tricep activation in a locked elbow position. Keep that in mind, a locked elbow position as compared to a push-up. And I give the win to the front step through because if you look further, that number where it says 70 plus or minus 30, that 30 is the standard deviation. It had a lower standard deviation, which is better, so it gets the win. For the pec major, the lateral ape was the highest of the animal flow movements, coming in at about 31%. Please remember some of that data from Moyer et al., who said a barbell bench press activates the pec around 25 to 30%. Most of the animal flow movements are like right in there. Push-up obviously got the highest at 89% for the pec major. So again, that was a no-duh for us. When we looked at the lat, we saw the forward crab with the win here at about 76%. And then front step through took the win for the rectus abdominis, the rectus femoris at around 87%. And it also took the win, which this was a bit surprising for us too, with the hamstring muscle at about 60%. Again, if you were to ask me ahead of time, I would have been predicting crab reach or forward crab to maybe elicit the highest in the hamstring muscle. So there's some neat things to think about there with all of that. Okay, let me try to sum this up here from our study. Looking at the last several slides, we showed that the animal flow movements resulted in moderate to very high muscle activations for all 8 muscle groups. And again, it was only the pec major muscle that we saw moderate. Everything else was high to very high. And with the exception of the pec major, where the push-up was the winner, an animal flow movement actually was responsible for the highest peak activation for all of the muscle groups that we tested, right? Similar to Pica et al., we also observed that females tended to show a greater activation for not only all muscles, but also across all movements than males did. Our conclusions and takeaways from this study were that quadrupedal movement training using animal flow appears to provide a substantial stimulus to the major muscle groups of the upper and the lower extremities and those of the trunk. In terms of muscle activation, animal flow and quadrupedal movement training was comparable to or superior to some common body weight exercises. Okay, this next slide, guys, this is going to be my attempt to throw maybe a concise position statement to all of this research. All right, so that's what the attempt here is. Let me read it for you. Altogether, the evidence here we have suggests that animal flow is a credible alternative form of exercise, which provides a proprioceptively rich and robust whole body muscle activation while eliciting moderate to vigorous levels of cardiorespiratory efforts. When practiced over time, animal flow can enhance proprioception, elements of executive brain function, movement quality through improvements in range of motion and motor control, and can potentially enhance muscular and cardiorespiratory health and fitness. Now, I know that last kind of point there is a bit of a scientific leap based on the last two studies we did. Admittedly, we haven't specifically looked at those outcomes, but I believe our last two studies lend decent, what we call biological plausibility to make that statement. Lately, guys, there's been a tremendous amount of research. Maybe you guys have been following along with this, and strategies being promoted for enhancing longevity or lifespan, as well as health span. I think about names like Peter Attia, Andrew Huberman, Dr. Casey Means, Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Sinclair out of Stanford, et cetera, right? There's a lot of this push moving on. People are writing books about lifespan and health span. If you follow those individuals or dive into them and look at some of the key tenets of what they promote or suggest for maximizing lifespan and maximizing health span, you'll notice that these include things like maintaining high aerobic fitness, maintaining muscle mass, all right, maintaining a good quality balance, the ability to redirect center of mass and maintain center of mass while extremities reach outside, the ability to maintain active joint range of motion. I believe that this data that we presented here to you today, it continues to support the notion that Animal Flow checks many of these boxes, all right, that are being touted as key tenets for not only a long life, but a really good, healthy, well life. So to me, this is powerful, powerful stuff. I used to be asked by individuals when I was back in my training days, you know, the hypothetical question, if you could just do one exercise, if your hands were tied and you could just do one exercise, what would it be for the rest of your life? And, you know, there's a lot that goes into it. Hands down, based on this research and based on my interest in living long and living very well, Animal Flow is definitely my answer for that question. So very cool stuff. I hope you guys agree and see that as well. So that kind of brings us to the end, but I got a bonus for you. Hot off the presses. Sorry, my notes back. Hot off the presses. This article just came out literally maybe a week ago. This was from the International Journal of Science and Research. This was an interesting rehabilitation study in which participants with non-specific low back pain, anybody there? All right, probably a lot of hands can go up for that, where they were exposed to quadrupedal movement training using Animal Flow 3 times per week for 4 weeks. The subjective ratings of pain, overall disability, spinal mobility, ranges of motion, dynamic balance, these were assessed before and then at 2 weeks, and then at the end of the study at the 4-week mark. The authors observed significant improvements in each outcome that they measured. So every outcome saw a significant increase from pre to post test, both at 2 weeks and at 4 weeks. And the authors concluded that participants who performed quadrupedal movement training showed more significant improvement in pain, lumbar ranges of motion, functional performances, in dynamic balance. Okay, check this one out if you get a chance. Like all studies, there are some limitations that you need to be aware of that might help influence your key takeaways and what you make of it. Most notably from this one was there was a lack of a control group. So just keep that in mind when you look at that. Okay, so no more surprises. That's it from a research standpoint. What's next? Well, at the moment, I'm not really sure. I am committed to a really interesting, maybe first of its kind, study regarding the health and fitness benefits of supplementing with a rare sugar known as allulose, D-allulose. So I'm committed to that for the next year. I'll be overseeing 6 undergraduate student projects. This is the most we've ever done in a year. with our undergraduate research, and we're also launching our new master's program. So I got a lot on my plate, and I'll be honest, I haven't given much thought to what's next for quadrupedal movement research. Personally, just off the cuff, I think it would be neat to expand on the EMG research by using, a full body model, left and right side setup. This way, we get a better understanding to observe the muscle activations, but also maybe look into common fascial lines that might be happening during our animal flow movements. I've always been interested in utilizing animal flow with athletes, maybe as a warm-up protocol, maybe on recovery days, or maybe intertwined into the body of their work that they're doing, and just seeing how that might influence different performance measures. One measure we haven't really looked at yet was power, especially rotary power. But maybe we can also look at injury rates. That's a little bit of a tougher study. Anyways, I'd be really interested in what you guys would like to see done, and I'm happy to receive your thoughts on that, maybe even as you post some questions. All right, so that brings me to the end here. So I want to thank you guys all very much for your time and for your attention. Sorry about the initial blip there at the beginning. Hopefully that was handled all right. I'd love to hear your questions and comments now. For those that are tuning in, you have some directions from Karen now. I'll stop sharing my screen here in a moment. But for those that are tuning in later, there's my contact info. And so if you have any comments or questions that you want to send to me directly, and for those that are here live with me as well, please know that this is open to you as well. So thank you all so much for listening. Let's hear some questions.
Jeff, great presentation, my friend. If we were in an auditorium, I would give you a standing ovation for sure. So thank you so much for sharing all that information with us, and also giving us that bonus study at the end. I didn't even know about that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, just hot off the presses about a week ago. So cool, right? It's getting into the clinical world a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'll shut up and I'll see who has some questions.
Will you